Am I live? A very good morning, everybody. We will be starting in 2 minutes because we do have some delegates that are joining us online, so we just want to make sure that we allow that the opportunity to be timely and effective with time. So if I could ask everybody who's joining us live to please take a seat and let's settle so that we can then start the proceedings of the day. If you haven't found a seat, we'll give you 30 seconds to just allocate the seat. We do apologize to the delegates online. We are starting in the next minute. We just want to make sure that we have everybody settled. Fantastic. Well, a very good morning to all of you who are joining us live. I'm going to say a very good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to those who are joining us online. I know that we have a global audience, so we want to acknowledge whatever time of day that you are joining us on. My name is Thami Nkadimeng. I am fondly and globally known as the Message Architect because I influence humanity and society through communication. In the last 2 years, I've had the privilege of doing such work across 6 continents in the globe. I've managed to be on stages the likes of Global Citizen, United Nations, and today here I am with the World Bank. I'm South African, born and bred, and proudly so. In an ever-changing world, if we were ever all told to pack our bags and go to our birth countries, which is our home, the place I'd have to come back to is South Africa. And so if conversations are to do with bettering South Africa, you can always count me in. Of course, today we are in the beautiful city of Cape Town. I often say that I have South Africa running through my veins, but Gauteng is my blood type. Not only have I only ever lived permanently in the province of Gauteng, but I also serve on the Gauteng Tourism Authority board. It is also the financial hub of South Africa. And so it's important to mention these things because they fall under the economic development of our country. In having done this work, 2 truths ring true to me. 1, innovation doesn't have to be big and scientific and technology and spaceship. Innovation can be simple. It simply means doing something in a better and new way in order to advance humanity and society. Second lesson for me is that you need to start in your own corner. Wait for nobody. It becomes the dream and the implementation of a team. Then it becomes the dream and implementation of groups. And eventually it becomes the dream and implementation of masses. So we talk about inclusive growth for South Africa report. You may sit there and say, so Thami, how are you including into the economy? Well, simply, I'm here, the message architect, making a living, both locally and internationally. But I ensure that every stage I go to, I too create jobs for other young South Africans. My makeup is done by a young South African who's making a living out of it, and I ensure that I wear wardrobe from South Africans. And today I proudly wear 𝗦𝚻. So that living of mine and my income in my own corner, it contributed to the inclusion of economic development. And so with that, Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana. Minister of Transport to the Republic of South Africa too, Barbara Creecy. Mr. 𝗂𝗃𝗄𝗄 𝗂𝗃𝗄𝗏, President of South African Local Government Association. Her Excellency Sandra Kramer, European Union Ambassador for South Africa. Ms. 𝗂𝗄𝗄𝗏, Regional Director of Agence Française de Développement for Southern Africa. His Excellency 𝗄𝗎𝗓 Sathir, Ambassador of Norway to South Africa. Dr. 𝗚𝗃𝗄𝗄𝗏, Chairman of the Board of ESCOM. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I officially welcome you to the Inclusive Growth for South Africa Report Summit. A round of applause, please. Just a few housekeeping rules. We know that some of you have read the report. We will be showing a QR code throughout the program at certain spurts. Please feel free to scan the QR code, and then you would be able to then download the report there. As you heard me a little bit earlier, we are streaming live, so that video will live embedded on the World Bank website. So if you'd like to go back to review the proceedings of the day, feel free to do so. We are happy for you to talk about us as loud and proud as possible. So do not switch off your phone. Just silence. Because we want you to take the videography. We want you to take the photography. We want you to please tag us at World Bank and use the hashtag inclusive growth. I always say, you can Google anywhere in the world. Conversations are had at every single second. The only difference that we need to make is ensure that we have objectives at the end of these conversations so that we are able to implement them to advance humanity and society. And we're going to endeavor to do that today. We want to give you the hope, the sense of urgency, for you to know how you can play your part as humanity in order to get this report going. So please do speak about it so that those who are not in the room are able to then engage as well. So without further ado, I'm going to call up to stage none other than the Senior Managing Director of World Bank to give us opening remark. Please help me welcome to stage Axel van Trotsenburg. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody, and I'm very pleased that we have with us today also the Minister of Finance and Minister of Transport, as well as ambassadors, I understand, and other officials. So welcome, and I'm really pleased to be here. And this was a good occasion because I was attending the G20 meeting, and I just wanted to take this opportunity to really congratulate the South African government for a really fantastic organization of the G20 meeting. And I mentioned to the Minister of Finance that together with the central bank president, they run a tight ship. And so this was very well managed on time, and there was discipline in the room. But also issues were discussed. And the reason why I'm referring to this is that the minister himself, but others as well, raised the economic growth issue. Economic growth, when you are looking at projections, be that from the World Bank, the IMF, regional organization, OECD, you all see that global growth is slowing. It's one of the slowest growth rates in decades. And this will pose very particular challenges. So I think we need to see, when we have this debate, there is a local component on the growth part, but there is also a regional and a global component of the growth picture that is difficult. And I think we need to keep this in mind. The reason that I also would like to stress that why I wanted to be here is that I don't see this study in isolation of South Africa. For the World Bank, this has been a major shift over the last 2 decades towards Africa. Africa is a key challenge for the international community to be as supportive as possible. And just to give you a sense that in 2000, our engagement in Africa was in all countries, but it was maybe in the order of $3 billion per year. 15% of our lending. It's now 45% in the order of $35 billion per year. And that will continue. If you're looking at the concessional arm, IDA, that goes to most of the sub-Saharan countries, that has shifted to 70% of the resources. We're talking about, over a 3-year period, $70 billion only on concessional resources. So I think we need to see this quite important. And when I look at this report, I also look at the report how South Africa can actually act as an engine for growth within the region. It's very important. It has an enormous potential, and that could also stimulate enormously. So I see this international aspect as absolutely important, that we need to see where are there growth poles and how can we actually generate it then nationally but also internationally. And therefore, I think this report has to be seen also in a much broader context. The other part is what I would like to say. When you think about the World Bank is not only about money. I'm always saying it has to be about ideas. The World Bank without ideas is bankrupt. We are not a simple bank. We have to basically promote ideas, promote exchange, and how we can actually also learn from experiences across the world. What worked, what didn't work, what's difficult. And I think that is what also drove, I think, this study. We have been doing this type of study where actually the report is not something that you write in your office and then you just bring it out and then you say, well, here it is. It is actually the result of a major exchange with government officials, with think tanks, with academia, and then complemented by also expertise from other countries that have also been grappling with these problems. Not to say that that is the right way, but to just learn. And I think this is what I think is the power of this kind of reports. I have seen that myself, having worked a long time in Latin America, but also East Asia, that this is a very interesting. It is not about that this is the truth. This is really what one needs to be. It is really to elaborate on policy options, what can be done, and then actually to say, what are the difficult things? Then you need to introduce the political economy of a country to see how certain reforms can be undertaken. But I think that it is interesting that South Africa is not alone. Many countries are struggling with it, are difficult issues, and so this report is really, in my mind, to see as a good instrument of provoking dialogue. I'm not saying there should be consensus. I think development is difficult, so there should be some controversy, and people say you're wrong on that. That is okay. But I think we need to actually look at what we can do. Clearly, I think this low growth scenario, where there are internal factors affecting the growth, but then also the external, and we can also not ignore them, and needs to be analyzed together. And the reason that I always look at it is why? Because I think in the report it is highlighted that growth, if it is low, we are failing the young populations, people who are expecting jobs. So youth unemployment, wherever you are, even in industrialized countries, you will see high rates compared to the normal unemployment rate. So there is always the question that you don't leave a whole generation behind. They have aspirations, and one needs to see, can we actually think how we can create a lot of jobs? I find that very powerful in our discussions particularly in Asia, where often the policymakers would start to say, well, we need to create so many million jobs. and in a year or so, and that really triggered a lot of debate on this. So I really think this is always important. You will also hear from the president of the World Bank that he has been putting jobs in his mouth in like every second sentence, because it is so important wherever you turn. And I think this is important also in South Africa. So I'm very happy that there are a lot of areas where it will require important engagement. I think that the report identifies a couple of key areas, and it starts certainly also with the public sector, what can be done, namely in terms of helping on the regulatory framework, but also on the expenditure framework, and what can be done to actually stimulate this. Now, this is in many areas a difficult area, because everybody is under tight budget constraints. There are many also vested interests. What we have been seeing also in the whole debate in many countries is, can one actually look to improve the efficiency of public expenditures, including, for example, subsidies. Also, we have identified that often, take in OECD countries agricultural subsidies. They are not helping, certainly, developing countries, but they often also are not very efficient. And so it is not sometimes that you say, do you slash the expenditures? You may actually need to reallocate the expenditures. That doesn't mean that, so it's not about just reducing, it is also about reallocating and see how the maximum effect can be done. I also think that it is particularly in every country, it's interesting also hear the debate about infrastructure. How can that be more resilient? Higher quality services. How can we actually see that the quality can improve? These are all difficult challenges, and there are many trade-off decisions. What we want to provoke is much more the debate on this, how one actually can find the way forward in a particular context, like in South Africa. In another country, there may be also emphasis, but that is, I think, going to be important. I like particularly on urban development. The way I see is, and this is not only South Africa, but my concern is how urbanization, particularly in Africa, and the entire continent, can be used as an engine of growth. And the reason why I'm saying that is, if you are looking at, for example, a Chinese experience, you look at the Vietnamese experience, it's clearly that a successful urbanization effort is a huge engine of growth. If it is not exploited in that way, growth will be lower. And the good news is there are policy options available, and we have actually seen that has stimulated in a large part in growth in East Asia, for example. And I think that kind of things, I think it is incredibly important. It's also important, again, when we're looking at the cost for people. That can be the actual cost for paying for services, but also the length of time people have to commute to work. And that is sometimes also particularly affecting women. And so one needs to see how one actually can see how we can improve on that. And then, of course, the private sector. There's always a big discussion in other countries as well. But it is ultimately the private sector that's going to create the jobs. And so here is then the discussion, what can be done to stimulate actually private investment, but most importantly also how one can stimulate employment generation on this. This is, again, never an easy topic, because there are different interests, but it is when we are looking at the employment challenge, you will see that it is important to look how one can unleash the dynamic forces of the private sector. And I'm thinking here again, not necessarily always the big enterprises, but we need to keep in mind that small and medium-sized enterprises in whatever economy you look in the world, they are ultimately the backbone for job creation. This may be the small companies of 2-3 people, but they are the most important ones in creating jobs. And so the way what we would hope with this launch of this report is very much for more of the debate, but also I think what is also good for the World Bank, this is also always a good learning experience, and I mentioned that to the country team. I've been leading the effort in the bank to transform also the knowledge bank and in a much more of an engagement bank, that it is not just writing reports at your desk, but how we actually bring the knowledge that the bank has worldwide together to stimulate this debate. And that is actually the main purpose of this. And I hope that this report serves that purpose, that we stimulate the debate, but also discuss hard the policy options, and then see if the government can also challenge us. I think what is always good is namely how we can learn from this experience much more, because I think this is going to be important. And again, I would always want to see is that in Africa, South Africa is the second largest economy after Nigeria, and so how one can actually see this economy as really as a growth pole for certainly Southern Africa, but if and beyond, I think that is where we certainly see also an incredible potential. And we see there also a lot of possibilities to cooperate with all of you to see how we can actually identify even more opportunities that can then ultimately benefit South Africa, but also beyond its border. So looking very much forward to the discussions. Let me also again thank South Africa for also and the authorities for facilitating also this debate. We have had a really great discussion, and I think I will highlight that. I do weekly videos to the whole staff. I'm highlighting the South African study this week because I think it's a very nice experience, and it's good to know that this is happening here. And I just want to congratulate the team, the government, but also the other participants in this effort. Great work. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Axel. I love what you said, that you're a different kind of bank that has to have ideas, and that the report may spark controversy, but what we're trying to push here is for dialogue. In preparing for this, I had the privilege of reading through the report and the sub-annexures to the report, and one line that really, really struck me was when it says, "It's never too late to act decisively." So a round of applause to the World Bank for acting decisively by coming up with this report. Really a round of applause. It actually got me reading a quote that got me thinking, that it says, "It is better to be boldly decisive and risk being wrong than agonize at length and be right too late." I thought that was super imperative when I read it. We're now going to hear a keynote address from the Minister of Transport for the Republic of South Africa. So please help me welcome on stage Minister Barbara Creecy.
Thank you very much, Thami, and allow me to acknowledge the Minister of Finance, the Senior Managing Director of the World Bank, ambassadors present today, and all the esteemed guests and participants. Thank you very much for inviting me and allow me to congratulate the World Bank for the launch of this exciting report, Driving Inclusive Growth in South Africa. Inclusive and sustainable economic growth is the apex priority of our 7th administration. In order to facilitate and sustain such growth, a functioning transport and logistics system is essential. A healthy transport sector is the lifeblood of a vibrant economy, and it enables the efficient and effective movement, both locally and internationally, of people and goods. Today, I will detail ways in which the South African government and the Department of Transport are working to ensure that the country's logistics sector is reinvigorated and acts as this important enabler of economic prosperity. Despite our significant competitive advantage as a logistics hub of the subcontinent, as we all know, our logistics sector has not been operating optimally over the last couple of years. And this has had enormous negative implications for the country's economy and also for citizens. The challenges in our logistics sector have been estimated by Business Day in an article, I think it was about 10 days ago, to be costing our country about 1 billion rand a day due to inefficiencies. Widespread theft and vandalism of rail infrastructure, inefficiencies in our ports have all hampered economic opportunities in the post-pandemic period, where much growth has been needed to sustain existing jobs and, as has been pointed out this morning, to create new jobs that are desperately needed in our country. Inefficiencies in our logistics system have also led to increases in road accident fatalities and, of course, increases in transportation costs of freight. And our poorly performing transport system has, of course, increased the cost of doing business in our country and the cost of living for ordinary citizens. Our competitors in the broader Southern African region have taken advantage of the challenges in our logistics sector. And I think one only has to look at the significance of the freight export through the port of logistics. We know that the Lobito corridor will soon be connecting the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the Copper Belt with ports in Angola. New initiatives to build railway lines in our neighbors, Namibia and Zimbabwe and Mozambique, show that South Africa can easily face losing competitive advantage. Broader geopolitical developments and protectionist measures mean that urgent reform must be implemented in our transport sector to ensure our economy does not stagnate and does not lose the competitive advantage we have enjoyed for millennia. Due to the seriousness of the challenges and the threats that it poses to our country's economy, government adopted what we call a whole-of-government approach and set about stabilizing and improving the transport sector through a number of initiatives. These are in line with the priorities suggested in the report today, particularly priority number 2, delivering quality infrastructure, and priority number 3, spatial efficiencies and access to opportunities. Ladies and gentlemen, realizing the scale of the problem that we are faced with, government established the National Logistics Crisis Committee, composed of representatives from the presidency, our department, and other related departments, as well as the private sector. It works to secure strategic logistic corridors handling commodities that are essential to export and economic markets, such as coal and iron ore, addressing backlogs and congestion at strategic border crossings, combating congestion in key national highway corridors such as the N1 and the N3, as well as interventions to combat cable theft and maintenance backlogs at both PRASA and Transnet. This collaboration has definitely seen modest improvements in our logistics performance. Now, to achieve the logistics system that we want, we as government have developed 3 numbers, which are our priorities for this 7th administration. The first is to achieve the movement of 250 million tons of freight by rail by 2030. The second is to go back to a situation where we have 600 million passenger journeys a year on our passenger rail system, so that we can reduce the cost of commuting for working people, for scholars, and for ordinary citizens. And lastly, so that we do not have congestion in our ports, we want to achieve the global benchmark of 30 to 35 gross crane moves per hour. Cabinet approved the White Paper on National Rail Policy in March 2022, and the rail policy is the document that introduces the structural reforms in the sector that are intended to enable private sector investment, optimal utilization of our rail network, and effective economic regulation of rail that will facilitate equitable access to the network and ensure that it is properly managed. As part of this process, and to ensure that we have clear and transparent rules that everybody understands, we are in the process of establishing a private sector participation unit between our department under the auspices of the Development Bank of Southern Africa. Once established, this unit will help direct and coordinate private sector investments in priority rail projects requiring capital investment. A key component of this process has been the publication on the 23rd of December last year of the Transnet Network Statement, followed by an addendum in January, officially marking open access to third parties. Additionally, the document provides details of the current state of the Transnet infrastructure as well as service levels to be agreed upon between the infrastructure manager of Transnet and the train operating companies. This survey of the entire Transnet rail network is crucial as it sets the parameters and modalities for third-party access to the network and will attract much-needed investment while fulfilling government's overarching objective of shifting freight from our roads back onto the rail network. Tariffs and access to the network will be regulated by the newly established Transport Economic Regulator, which will not only govern the railway sector, but will also regulate ports and other areas of the transport industry. The vertical separation of Transnet and the appointment of a manager has been a critical step to facilitate transparent implementation of third-party access. On the 1st of October last year, the Transnet Rail Infrastructure Manager, or what we call TRIM, was established, and this important unit will shortly operate as an independent subsidiary of the Transnet system. The date for the establishment of an operating division is the 1st of April 2025, and a wholly owned subsidiary by the 30th of September 2025. So you can see that we are moving with speed in implementing the reform process. The department is also in the process of issuing requests for information regarding potential investment in the rail and the port sector. This serves to share information with the public regarding possible PSP projects, but also will allow the department and by extension Transnet to gather information on projects for potential third-party investment, so that later this year we are able to put out requests for proposals that are informed by societal and market appetite. Later on, we will also put out a similar RFI for the passenger rail environment, and this will document various opportunities for private sector participation in the PRASA network. I want to emphasize again that throughout this process, all rail and port infrastructure will remain under government ownership. We are also in the process of consulting with organized labor regarding the details of our freight logistics roadmap. We cannot continue with the status quo where derailments and port blockages cost our economy billions of rand and thousands of jobs in all sectors of the economy are at risk. Ladies and gentlemen, regarding the inefficiencies that have occurred in the port sector, Transnet has launched a recovery plan focused on increasing and stabilizing port and rail volumes. We have established various war rooms for specific corridors and commodities, and this allows Transnet and the private sector to collaborate, to share expertise and address challenges such as derailments and unplanned maintenance. Only yesterday you would probably have seen in the media that we have finally received some of the new equipment, cranes and straddles that we badly need for Pier 1 and Pier 2 in Durban, and we are looking forward to taking receipt of similar machinery for Port Elizabeth and also for Cape Town in March this year. Collaboration with stakeholders has helped address bottlenecks and inefficiency. The close collaboration, for example, with the Fruit Growers Association and other logistical stakeholders here in the city of Cape Town has eradicated the delays we experienced last year. And despite higher wind stoppages this year, the port is meeting agreed shipping plans and no vessel is waiting to berth due to poor operating performance. In Richards Bay, the port and the municipality have established a truck holding facility, and that has assisted us in moving trucks off the N2 and ensured that trucks have a safe waiting area that doesn't interfere with other traffic that would be commuting to the north of KZN. All of these measures will enable us to meet the targets we have set for the logistics sector for this year. But these ambitious targets cannot be achieved within the existing Transnet system, and as I have emphasized throughout this input, will require significant private and public investments in infrastructure, rolling stock, and digital systems. This can only be achieved through a partnership between government and the private sector with technical knowledge, experience, and the world's best practice that can be shared. I was given a gift last week. It's a book called Switch Points, and it's all about the turnaround of the Canadian railway system. And it has a wonderful quote in the foreword, which inspired me a lot, and I thought I would end by sharing it with you today. It reads, "We're at the dawn of a new golden age of rail. If you don't believe that, you're not looking at the evidence. In today's world of climate change, the trucking industry struggles with fuel costs, clogged highways, and decaying infrastructure. Airlines are failing to render service for many reasons. And planet-wide, we have financial markets in deep trouble, political instability that threatens our economies, and the whole global warming pollution mess. Amidst this gloom, a winner is quietly emerging. Our fuel-efficient, economical, low-polluting, dependable railroads. A current campaign claims that rail can move a ton of freight over 400 miles on a single gallon of diesel. And that is not advertising puff. It is true. The coming decade will be transformative. We will enjoy a virtual explosion of rail transport. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Such incredible insights. I have so much I want to say, but in the interest of time, I have to keep my link as short as possible. So I hope we'll all be able to engage during the networking session. So I'm going to swiftly bring onto stage for the next keynote address, the Minister of Finance for the Republic of South Africa. Please help me welcome to stage Minister Enoch Godongwana.
Program Director 𝗘𝗃𝗵 Nkadimeng, the MD of the World Bank, Axel. Your surname is too long. You know that I call you Axel. You don't mind since I've known you for over the years. My colleague, Baba Creecy, distinguished guests. I want to start with a story that in 2019, National Treasury published a document which in it they outlined structural constraints to growth. Because it's quite important as we see this book, there's a tendency to polarize debate in South Africa as the media as if what is being published is not continuity and change. Continuity and change. National Treasury published this document. It attracted a lot of debate in South Africa, as you would know. That's one thing we're good at. Sometimes we polarize the debate. I'm going to come back to that point. So it identifies the structural constraints to growth. Axel refers to the point I made in the dinner with the ministers of finance, G20 ministers of finance. It's my favorite topic, which you would know, because we tend to be more focused and say countries have got emerging economies and African economies have got a challenge with debt. And I must say the problem is nobody worries about Japanese debt to GDP. Nobody worries about Italy's debt to GDP. In fact, as all of them have got more than 100% debt to GDP. Nobody worries. But people are worried over South Africa's debt to GDP. Justifiably so. Because the problem with debt is not its size. It's quite important to note that. The problem with debt is not its size, it's the capacity of the economy to service that debt. It's the capacity of that economy to service that debt. If you've got these structural constraints and you're not growing your economy, which in our case has been the case for more than a decade, we've not been growing the economy, so your capacity to service that debt becomes a challenge. So growing the economy is not a luxury for us, it's a necessity. Now, drawing that point, there's a lady in the room who shall remain nameless for the purpose of this discussion, I've asked it the other day, I said, if we were to model a 6% growth and come back and say, for a 6% growth in this economy, what are the key things we need to do to get there? What are the key things? Then you would say growth would require, for you to grow at 6%, you'd require to do these massive structural changes. So, coming back to the document of 2019, government responded in 2020 and created what is called Operation 𝗿𝗂𝗃𝗃𝗃, a joint project between National Treasury and the Presidency. National Treasury and the Presidency. Its main focus is to deal with structural constraints in the economy and introduce structural reforms. We've been on this journey. I'm raising this journey because there's a tendency to think that you simply you press the button, all of a sudden things change. Structural reforms are also a challenge and also a contested terrain political. Not an easy thing. So, phase one of these reforms included the electricity sector, the logistics sector. I must say, one of the things we've said we don't want to repeat is the template we did in the electricity sector. The template we did in the electricity sector, we spent more time fixing the institution than fixing power to the grid. I'm sure we draw a distinction between those two, are not necessarily mean the same. And therefore, spent 16 years fixing the institution, Eskom. Doing a lot of bailouts with all its attendant consequences. 2023, I asked my officials, I said, can you take a step back and go to 2008 and say 2008 to 2023, how much have we spent on bailing out institutions? 520 billion rand. And then I say, go to the other side. Where did that money come from? Because we didn't raise taxes to that magnitude. We must have cut expenditure in different areas during that period. Massive expenditure on a number of things. So when we took the logistics sector with the roadmap, immediately was a departure from how we handled the electricity sector. Its template is different. I don't want to repeat that. Minister Chris has outlined that in detail. Among other things, amongst was the visas, we'd also change the visa system completely. It was part of those Operation 𝗿𝗂𝗃𝗃𝗃 structural reforms. And people are carrying it now. The Minister of Home Affairs and Tourism are launching an e-visa system. It's a product of what we started in 2020. Skills reform is also part of that. I'm mentioning this so that when people read this book, read it in conjunction with these reforms, it does emphasize the change, continuity and change. We're going into the second phase now. I'm going to come back to that, which deals with local government and so on, which also talks to what they're talking about, urbanization. But what they have done is also touch the sacred cows in their report. What they are proposing are some of the institutions which are likely to polarize the debate in South Africa. We are likely to have three extremes, particularly on these issues. Three issues are highlighting in the report. The black economic empowerment. On one hand, you'll get the extremists of market fundamentalists who are going to say it undermines market fundamentalism. On the one hand, you're going to get the people who are saying it undermines transformation. Transformation is everything. Instead of approaching the debate rational, I'm raising these issues because we've got to approach all of this debate not from these two extremes. To say, does it make sense? What are the modalities? What are the changes? How do we fine-tune some of these things? Raise local content. They raise the collective bargaining issues. All of those are going to be a polarized debate in South Africa. We need to do that. They also highlight what we're also doing in government now. Many desperate attempts to deal with active labor market policies. I didn't know that there are about 100 This report, we're working, there's a team, a government team working on it. They said we've got 100 active labor market policy instruments in 20 departments. We've got a team which is working on that. We hope that work will be finalized in September. Regulatory issues need also to be looked into. I don't mind. You know, one time I was talking to 𝗚𝗃𝗵𝗂𝗂𝗂, the CEO of Standard Bank, gave me a file. He said a bank in South Africa is regulated by 208 pieces of legislation and regulations. A big bank like Absa, Standard Bank, employs about 3,000 people whose main function is to deal with the regulations, not anything else, to deal with compliance. You may say sometimes there's some good in Elon Musk and Trump's madness sometimes when you look at these regulations. So, what's the second phase where we're heading to? What is the second phase of Operation Vulindlela, particularly, which is also a subject of this report, is urbanization, is local government. I didn't recognize President of SALGA. Now I remember I should have done so, now that I'm talking about your field. So it's local government reform. Tied to that is human settlement. You can't deal with that issue without not dealing with human settlement. I can't remember who wrote this piece in 1992. Somebody wrote, I think it's, don't know what as Mike Muller or Peter Hudson, warned us about setting apartheid in concrete as part of the development. What does that mean? What that means is reinforcing the same apartheid patterns of development, setting apartheid in concrete. Our human settlement policy practices are, in fact, a confirmation of what we warned about, of setting apartheid in concrete. If you go into 𝗘𝗃𝗁, in any town, people are going closer to Stellenbosch and Somerset than densification, bringing people closer to town. The same applies in Johannesburg. People are going right to the West Rand and so on, instead of bringing people closer to town and densification and going up the building. And therefore, the unintended cost of transport. Not only in terms of cost, rand percent, but in terms of time. You know, I was talking to a lady who was serving me in a hotel yesterday. Stays in a pattern, far end of 𝗘𝗃𝗁. When they come to work, before coming to town, they've got to come and get a taxi to 𝗙𝗔𝗔 in Cape Town. That's 27 rand. She's got to get another transport from 𝗙𝗔𝗔 to town. Probably another 40 rand. So, is the waiter who serves you in a restaurant spends about 67 rand per one trip. So we've got to change, not to reinforce setting about it in concrete. Our urban settlement has got to be changed. Our urban settlement can be changed. And then they then say in the study, one of the things which talks to my area of work, we've got to review the grant system. We've got to review the grant system, which we're actually going to. I just decided just to talk about your report a bit than do anything. So, grant system. And related to that, they've given attention to public spending in the report. Given attention to public. I couldn't miss that part. I couldn't miss that part because I was interested, what are they going to say about it? They say the problem is not the money that I'm giving people, is how efficiently it is being used. That should be a nice thing to hear as a Minister of Finance. Is how it should be used. So it talks to the composition of spending and reprioritization and focusing on what they call it impactful and feasible. That's their language, not mine. And I agree. So what's my takeaway from the study? What's my takeaway from the study is that the challenges, and we've got to learn a lot from that study, from the report. And what was fascinating about it is that it we've got to do small things to changes. General 𝗂𝗶𝘃𝗶 of the Freedom Fund Plus used an interesting language in Afrikaans. He says, let's look for what he calls 𝗘𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃. 𝗘𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, small jackals, in order to change expenditure patterns. So one of the things, so it requires, the manner I look at it, it requires the whole of government. It requires the whole of government for it to be successful in mobility, which Minister Creecy has spoken to, competitiveness, to require a whole of government. It's an important report in my view, which if taken seriously, it can help us in what we're trying to do to deal with the growth challenge. ثمبي, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask you to please stay here with me, Minister. I'm going to ask Minister Creecy to also come here. If I can ask the following people to come join me here on the front and bring your report. We want to get a beautiful group photo. Axel, please join me. Satu, please join me. And all the World Bank senior managers, can you also please join me here in front? Yes, please, with your report, so we can have a beautiful picture that we can then utilize for everybody. We want to capture the moment so that once things get implemented, we say we started it here. There's the picture. So if I could please have the World Bank senior managers. Do we have anybody there? Is that okay? Start with them. Thank you. Is that okay? Fantastic. Sorry, they do want one more, so I do need your beautiful pages. One more, just one more, Enoch. One more. They want to acknowledge the authors as well, who we're going to be in a fireside chat with, so we just want one with them in it.
sorry. Thank you very much. Camera, smile. Thank you very much. Great. Thank you.
I'm going to ask all of us to please cast our eyes on the screen to watch the following video.
I think the next 2 years to shift the dial towards a 3 or even 5% growth rate our models show, we've got to fix infrastructure. I think we're on the way with energy. We are getting there with port and rail with some of the privatization, but I think the next key challenge is actually water infrastructure.
One of the key constraints for us is the cost of capital, and it looks like we are well positioned to reduce the interest rates. I think the country is ready for it, and it is certainly a huge enabler to facilitating accelerated growth.
So it is very important that regulatory authorities regulate in line with the country's level of maturity and development. Secondly, investing in digital infrastructure, especially in underserved areas, is of paramount importance.
The particular areas of growth we expect to see are in infrastructure investment, the positive effects of our power security, as well as a corporate capex acceleration.
Policy certainty, which makes it easier for people to invest and to start businesses and to grow.
I think we all know that empowering youth is in the long term the most sustainable way to grow the economy.
South Africa must focus on reforming education and training systems to better align with industry's needs.
We need to work on making sure that funding is also easily accessible. It is there, but to actually access it, it's quite hard.
In one key aspect, we look very different from other developing countries in that we have very low levels of informality. That is key to resolving our unemployment challenge, which is to open up access opportunities.
More job opportunities come to life for me in the manufacturing sector, and in particular given South Africa's climate in green manufacturing.
I feel like there could be a skills program that could enable people to have certain skills that could allow them to either open their own businesses or be able to enter certain job markets.
So we've just heard from policymakers, academia, the ordinary South African citizens, what their take is on achieving economic growth, well, inclusive economic growth within South Africa. I'm going to ask you to please make a resounding sound for the following two gentlemen once I've introduced both of them. They are the authors to the report, and I'm going to be on a fireside chat with them. So please help me warmly welcome to stage Jacques Morisset, Lead Economist and Program Leader at World Bank. And then we'll also be joined by Javier Baez, Lead Economist at World Bank. A round of applause, please, for them. So we're going to jump right into it because we don't really have the luxury of time, but we want to get a really great and robust and engaging conversation. We will not be taking Q&As for this particular section, but later on we'll have a Q&A session for the next panel discussion. Jacques, I'm going to jump right into the first question with you. There's certainly no shortage of economic reports, in South Africa, but you decided to come up with the new World Bank report. What sets it apart from the previous diagnostics of South Africa? I'm sure people want to know that, right?
No, it's a good question. Can you hear me? Yeah. Does it work?
Are you able to all hear him clearly?
Perfect.
Okay, thanks.
No, it's a good question because actually that's the first question we ask ourselves. What can we bring to the debate? And as mentioned by the Finance Minister, there's not shortage of...
Are you not able to hear him? Can I ask the tech team to please come and help me? We want to make sure that online they also hear him. Can I ask you to continue speaking for me, please, Jacques?
Hello?
Thank you.
Okay, good. Now, I was saying there's no shortage of very good diagnostic. The Minister of Finance mentioned the 2019 report produced by Treasury, but there's plenty of them, and actually plenty of them dated 20 years ago. So it's a journey of humility when you work on South Africa. And I would say that you have a consensus on the diagnostic. Even 20 years ago, people were saying, okay, South Africa needs to do something different. And so the consensus is there. Where you don't have a consensus is what to do about it. And actually, because it's a vibrant democracy and everybody has different opinions, it brings some kind of paralysis, and not much has been done. And so what we decided to do is to engage with many stakeholders in the economy. And first we went to the government. We worked very closely with National Treasury, but as well with other departments. We went to so many experts from the academia. We spoke with businessmen, with students. So we spent a lot of time to engage. Why, what can be done to start the reform? That was a question. What we did as well, South Africa is not unique. Many other economies, including mid-income economies, are facing the same challenges of implementation. So we went to international experts. We went to Nobel Prize laureate Michael Spence, which was leading the Co-Commission, which is certainly one of the biggest and most recognized studies on inclusive growth. And we went to former ministers of Chile, Indonesia, India. Okay, what did you do right? How were you able to implement the policies? So what you will find in the report is that all of these people we have been discussing, and in line with Operation Bundela, go with small steps. I forgot how he mentioned it in Afrikaner, but don't try to do everything at once. You need to prioritize. You need to create a momentum for reforms, and you need to convince people that you're in the right way. So that's what we try to do in this report, and we focus on 4 priorities, and maybe we will discuss more in depth what we're proposing in these 4 priorities.
Fantastic. So Javier, I love that we're stopping on the 4 priorities, and I want us to start diving into them. There are 4 priorities. One such is, making a difference on government spend, and I think Bob Enoch just said he was very, very interested on that area. What are some of the ways you think that government can utilize public spend, not just how, but with maximum impact, actually?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Good morning to everyone. Now, this is very important, and the Minister of Finance already said of some of the things that I was I could say in responding to this question is as we know, the fiscal space in South Africa has been closing very fast. The public debt to GDP ratio has been increasing. It was 25% in 2008, and it has increased to close to 75% now. And as the minister rightly said, servicing that debt is closing the fiscal space. So spending public money well is always important, but now for South Africa it's a must, it's a necessity. But it can also be a game changer. There is evidence from many countries that if public resources are used well, they are a powerful engine of growth. Actually, some studies estimate that if you increase public expenditures by 1%, you can attain a boost in economic growth of a similar magnitude. And that is what people call the fiscal multiplier, that effect from public expenditure to the economy. South Africa used to experience that positive effect in the past. But unfortunately, what we have seen in recent years is a weakening of that effect to a point that actually that multiplier has turned negative. So there are 2 sides of the problem, as the minister said. One is that too much money has been going towards consumption at the cost of reducing the funds that are invested in capital, which basically lay the foundation for growth. So when you compare South Africa against other relevant competitors, you see that South Africa falls in that subset of countries that is spending too much on consumption. To give you an order of magnitude of the gap, for instance, compared to fast-growing countries in Asia, South Africa invests between 3% and 5% less. Okay, so that's one side of the problem. And the other side is also referring to the minister is when it spends good amounts of money in the right things, it doesn't get high value for money. And a good example of this is in social sectors, which is critical for South Africa. South Africa spends 12-13% on education and health combined as a percent of GDP, but it gets the returns of a country that spends, roughly speaking, half of that, okay? And so clearly, as he said, you need to maximize the return of the investment. So in the report, which, as Jack said, is a collective effort. It's a result of brainstorming and identify ideas. We came with a three-part game plan, which is first, spend more efficiently. Every sector of the economy that you can see, there are opportunities for consolidation, streamlining programs, cutting waste, maximizing impact. Also for putting big projects under more scrutiny. So that's one area. The second one is the government cannot do this alone. There are so many gaps in investments, and you need partnerships with the private sector. They are happening already in infrastructure and in services, social services. And there are good examples of that, but this needs to be expanded. So stronger partnerships with the private sector is the second key element. And the last one is state capacity. State capacity to improve service delivery, which is not only a matter of building that technical capacity, implementation capacity, but also strengthening the incentives. And a good example is the transfers from the national to the subnational government. Subnational governments are responsible for 80% of the expenditures, yet they raise only 20% of the revenues. So we see that there is a lot of room for improvements in terms of strengthening the incentives for institutions to deliver more. Yeah.
I love that line that you used, spending good amount of money, but in the right things. And I think such a space is also within the South African public infrastructure. I wanted to zone particularly on the energy and transport space. I think, you know, in recent years, some people might even say that those spaces have become more of a roadblock than an actual bridge that they were intended for. Granted, we've seen some movement and improvement in the energy space within the last year or so. But Jacques, I'm going to come back to you and say, what more can be done? What more can be done for you know, infrastructure?
So we already spoke a lot about infrastructure this morning, and it's not a surprise. It's not a surprise because today, if you have to single out one constraint to inclusive growth, it's certainly infrastructure. And we're talking transport for sure, we're talking energy, we spoke about it, and mentioned in our Borat intervention, water is also a big issue. But it's also an opportunity, because if we believe that if the government is doing, you know, the right policies, the right reform, what it has started already in energy and now in transport, the economy can accelerate growth to 1 to 2% in the short term, and certainly to get to 3-5% by 2030. So it is important. It's a strategic sector. It is a strategic sector. We translate those improvements as well into jobs, and we estimate that 500,000 jobs could be created by the right reforms in infrastructure. So when I'm saying right reforms, what do I mean with it? Actually, it's what the government has been doing the last couple of years. So we're not reinventing the wheel, and actually we're working closely together with the Minister of Finance on budget support operation, and we're working closely with the Minister of Transport as well in transforming the logistical and freight transport sectors as well. But as said by the Minister, what you want is good and affordable services. That's what you want. And the lessons from experience, you need technologies, and technologies are moving very fast, and you need financing. And at the end of the day, who can help you to bring it, to deliver those good services? It will be the private sector. It will not be the private sector alone. I'm not saying that the state has no role to play. Actually, the role has a very important role to play in the system, but it will be through a partnership, and the state will have to play a very important as a regulator. We define some quick wins in the report, because that's what it's about. We believe, and you know about it, that certainly today the main bottleneck for energy is transmission. The country will need to build 15,000 kilometers in new transmission lines in the next 5 to 6 years. So how to do it? We propose, okay, adopt some regulations to have a private sector project. You can do it quickly. Actually, it's not so difficult because South Africa has done it in other sectors. If you're looking telecommunication, if you're looking civil aviation, South Africa has been a leading reforming countries with wonderful results. You have the best companies, telecommunication and civil aviation in the continent, and you have been creating thousands of jobs in these two sectors. So bring the private sector into transmission, not alone, for sure, the role has an important to play. And the same, and mentioned, I don't want to go back, but it's also important for freight and logistics. You know, the framework now is in place for transferring some of the lines to the private sector. Let's do it all together. But be careful, you need strong regulators, because what you don't want is to go from a public monopoly to a private monopoly. So you need to be careful as well. So do it, but do it smartly.
I love the use of technologies because, you know, a lot of times I think when people do think of innovation, I said it at the beginning, they think of the area of technology, and there's a phrase that says, you know, encourage innovation because change is our lifeblood. And when I think of lifeblood, I also think how cities are the lifeblood to the economy. But it seems like in order for blood to work, it must flow. And I'm just going to come to you, Javier, and ask you the question, how do we get that flow, you know, with talent, infrastructure, with businesses from cities to the economy, while we're actually tackling also the, you know, the challenge of poverty and inequality?
No, thank you, Thami. Well, to do that, you need well-functioning cities, right? And we know that the spatial location or the spatial segregation of people and economic activities in South Africa is largely the legacy of apartheid. But compared to other countries in the world, you see that this create a lot of obstacles in South Africa for economic growth and inclusion, much more than in other countries experiencing rapid urbanization. And the government has been trying hard. A lot of policy efforts have been devoted to make cities more efficient and improve mobility, but it's difficult to break that pattern. And two symptoms define the problem. One is actually the structure of cities. So cities in South Africa, as the Minister of Finance rightly described it, they are growing horizontally rather than vertically. And what that means is that people and economic activity are spreading out across the space. That undermines what is known as agglomeration forces, meaning those synergies that you are talking about, the synergies within and between markets that increase the pool of firms, workers, consumers, the flow of ideas. And then when we look at cities, we ask ourselves, is really true that cities in South Africa look very different from the large metropolis in the world? And then we compare these cities against a large sample of cities worldwide, and yes, it's true. The density of cities in South Africa, roughly speaking, close to economic clusters, is 1/3 of what you observe in a typical city across the globe. So that's one side of the problem, low densification. The second one, and it was also mentioned earlier, is mobility. It's difficult to commute to work, especially for low-income people. It can take up to 2-3 hours. And they spend, if you only account for the cost of transportation, half of their daily earnings. So when you compare a typical low-income worker from South Africa against one from Vietnam, the one from South Africa takes home less than half than the equivalent worker in Vietnam, just because the high transportation costs. So when you put these problems together, low density and difficult mobility, the results are very dramatic, because the density of jobs in poorer areas is 80% less than the most affluent areas. So what to do? How can we make cities to work for people and not against them? So the report is identifies several quick wins, but let me give you just a couple of examples, Thami and friends. One is the government has been investing a lot in developing mass public transport with mixed results. So we find changes that can be to strengthen incentives, align transparency and performance, because mass transport systems explain only 7% of the rides in South Africa. Minibus taxis account for more than half of the trips daily in South Africa. And this is another sector that is you can identify a lot of quick wins to improve integration of these minibus taxis with the public transportation systems to make them more affordable. And we even identify the option of subsidizing trips for low-income people. The savings, you can find savings in mass transportation systems by doing some reforms and then reallocating these to, for instance, vouchers to low-income people. And lastly, on cities, you cannot transfer cities overnight, Thami. It takes time. But we also see that there are some big wins in changing regulations that can encourage this densification, including of affordable housing, closer to critical parts of the city, to transit hubs, to economic centers. So I think the report proposes a set of actions that can start get things going in the right direction. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for that. You know, when I was preparing for this, I had quite a good giggle. And the good giggle for me was there's two very difficult parts of the work that I do. The first is keeping time, and the second is pronouncing names correctly, because we want to do that on stage, I know. But one of the things that I really, really enjoy is just learning through the actual content. And when I looked at the last key area of a private sector, I really see the private sector playing a role of an engine. So I went from economic now to learning how the economics to learning how an engine works, because a lot of people say that, you know, the private sector is the engine of the economy, but they believe that it is running quite low. So I went and I studied, okay, so when an engine of a car is running low, what do? It means the fluid levels are low and we need to increase the fluid levels. And I think that's partly what we need to be doing within the private sector. And I'm going to come back to you, Jacques, to say, how do we jumpstart this engine? How do we get the fluid levels increased in order to propel business, not just to propel business though, to increase sustainable job creation?
No, actually, it may have been the most difficult question, you know, to respond in the report. And I just want to emphasize everything we have been speaking about, infrastructure, urban mobility, state capacity, has to be directed to make the private sector a dynamic one, because as mentioned a few times this morning, jobs will be created by the private sector. So having said that, we ask the question, what is a healthy private sector? How are jobs going to be created? And we came up with two important facts. The first one, if you're looking big enterprises in South Africa, I went through the Fortune magazine ranking, and you go to 2000, and you compare to the ranking today, it's basically the same enterprises. You have two telecommunication companies, but it's mining, finance. You compare that to dynamic economies in East Asia or even the US, you will see that this ranking is completely different in 20 years. So one, you have not a dynamic, big enterprises. More or less the landscape is the same. Nothing wrong to be the same, but it shows as well that you lack dynamism. You go to the other extreme and you look at small and medium enterprises. The net rate of creation of small and medium enterprises in South Africa is 1/3 that what you can see in other economies. So you put together, you don't have dynamic big enterprises, and you don't have creation of small, medium enterprises. So something needs to be changed. So that's why we emphasize, so what I'm saying before, you need to deal with other constraints, but you need to create this dynamism. For big enterprises, we believe that South Africa needs to play with its assets. Open your economy, you're strong. Why? And actually, that's what the government wants to do. If you're looking, the South African government is spending a lot of money in investment promotion, but why? Investors are not coming as much as they should do because you have such an attractive economy. One easy, quick win. Look at the booklet of the, maybe I'm not going to be some friends, but look at the booklet published by the Department of Trade and Industry for incentives and regulations for private investment, domestic and foreign. It's so complicated. You have incentives depending on your size, your race, your location, your sectors. It's the lesson of experience. If you go to Mauritius, if you go to Malaysia, if you go to China, what investor wants, it's predictability, it was one of the message, and simplicity. Simplify. You're strong enough, South Africa doesn't need to provide too many and complicated incentives. Focus on what you have, and then focus what you need and what you want, and it's jobs. So nothing wrong to promote jobs, and that's certainly one of your priorities. You can even incentivize jobs because the cost of hiring is expensive in South Africa. So that's for big enterprises. The second part, you need to unlock the power of small and medium enterprises. And when you ask them, you have two big issues coming from small and medium enterprises. We need skills, and we need financing. In financing, I'll just give you one example. I still don't understand why you don't have e-money, why you cannot use your phone. You can use it with digital banking if you have a banking account. But when you go to township, yes, people have some banking account, but they're not using it. They need to go to, to another place to go to the bank, spending time transactions. Why you don't follow the lead of so many countries? It's easy. You just authorize mobile companies to do payments. It's one example. I believe you have some quick wins, and you can unleash the potential of the private sector in South Africa, which is certainly one of the most important challenges.
I like the potential, and when we talk about potential, we cannot also work in silos. Things need to come in together in order to work as a collaboration. And one such example is the fact that the report is actually aligned to what we just heard from President Cyril Ramaphosa, at the State of the Nation address. He spoke about wanting to invigorate the economy. In actual fact, he spoke about a 3% growth in, the near future, while giving opportunities to all. And so I have this picture in my mind. By the way, Javier is an Ironman athlete. Yep, he is. I promise you, while having a full-time job. So that's swimming, that's biking, and that's running. So he's an actual Ironman athlete. And I have this vision in my mind of, President Cyril Ramaphosa running in between meetings, and you run to him, and you have 2 minutes. What's the one thing, if you could catch him, that you'd say he must take out of this report that's very aligned to the State of the Nation address?
Well, thank you, Thami. I would definitely run fast to see if I can catch him and tell him a couple of things. First, I would tell him that I listened carefully to the State of Nation address, the latest one, given a few days ago, and I completely agree with the ambition to grow the economy at 3%, to lift growth to 3%. I think South Africa has the talent, the resources, the resilience, a lot of comparative advantages to achieve that. So I would tell him, President, I think that's the right vision for the country, that's the right ambition. But you know this better than me, President. Under the current conditions, that is difficult. Over and over, we see that growth is very slow. GDP per capita now is at the levels of 2007. Unemployment is very high, poverty also remains substantially high. So I'm sure, Mr. President, these things keep you awake at night,
yes.
Right? And so that's the first thing. I sympathize.
Yeah.
But the second thing I would tell the President is, Mr. President, there are good news. There have been other countries that have been at similar crossroads, and they managed to turn things around. Countries such as China, Vietnam, India, Poland, they have embarked on reforms with great success. So I want to leave you with 2 levers, Mr. President. They are very high level, but let me give you 2 levers that the country has that could be very powerful, but yet underutilized. One is injecting more competition into markets. We see a lot of opportunities to do that, and everyone wins. firms, small, micro, medium, large ones, consumers, workers. More competition means more innovation, better prices, and what the country desperately needs, jobs. The second thing, Mr. President, the second lever is institutions. We need to make institutions better enablers of growth and prosperity in South Africa and not obstacles. And it's not only about the state capacity, it's about simplifying regulations. So there are a lot of quick wins also to make the institutions enablers. So that's the second. And the last thing is, I know, Mr. President, that this is probably too high level and broad, but of course I had only 2 minutes with you. And this is a teaser. I wanted to tell you that we work very closely with your team, but also with people from the academia, the private sector, local experts, and experts from Latin America, Asia, Nobel laureates. We got together, and as a result of that, we have just launched a report that consolidates our ideas. To support this agenda, Mr. President, that you have already embarked on, we see reforms going in the right direction, but these ideas can help fulfill your vision. So we are happy to engage with your team whenever you're interested. And let me finish, Mr. President, with there are a lot of sources of inspiration in South Africa. It's easy to look for sources of inspiration, and this is a personal reflection. When I moved to South Africa about 3 years ago, I read a quote that now is my motto for my personal and professional challenges. And it's short and powerful, and it comes from Mandela. And it says, "It all seems impossible until it's done."
Yeah.
Yeah.
A round of applause, please, for that. I certainly think...
I know that was more than 2 minutes.
I was going to say that.
Sorry.
I was going to say, I certainly hope he gets his 10 minutes one day soon with the president. So that brings us to a close for this fireside. Please, everybody, Javier and Jacques, a round of applause for them as they make their way down to their seats. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get into a panel discussion. And apologies to those online, we won't be able to take questions from you. But once we're done this panel discussion, we will endeavor to answer as many questions on the floor. So if you do have a question, once we finish the first round of questions on stage, feel free to just put your hand up, and myself and one of the team members will come and locate you, and then we will rotate the roving microphone. We're going to ask for the question to stay as succinct as possible. I know sometimes you have to give context, but as succinct as possible so that we can get to as many questions as possible. But we're going to start off with then our panel discussion here on stage. Please help me welcome to stage Trudy Makaya, who is a partner at Boston Consulting Group. A round of applause, please, for Trudy. We are also joined by Amina Patterson, who's an entrepreneur and a founder of Solve4X. A round of applause, please, for Amina. And our last live panelist is made up by James McKay. He is CEO of Energy Council of South Africa. A round of applause, please, for James. What we wanted to do was include a little bit of technology today, and so we thought we'd play around with that. If we're gonna use the word inclusive, let's utilize it in everything that we're running. So we do have a fourth panel member. However, that fourth panel member will come in the form of a screen. So that is Danny Leapziger. He is the professor at the George Washington University. We took the opportunity to ask Danny what does he think about the future of economy in South Africa. Let's hear his response on the screen.
It's no secret that South Africa has taken several steps backward in recent years, and this report hopes to provide some guidelines for where interventions might be most successful to put South Africa back on a favorable growth path. I should say that I and three of my colleagues, Nobel laureate Michael Spence, former Minister of Finance Andres Velasco from Chile, and Minister of Planning Monte Calawalia and I were advisors to this report, and we focused on certain key areas where the government needs to intervene. The first was energy, where obviously we need to see some improvement in delivery and service, and reduction in the role of the public sector. The second area that we focused on had to do with public spending, where in addition to good macro management, which the government does have, it seems that a lot of spending is going to cover the losses of state enterprises and the losses of certain municipalities. So this is money not well spent, and we made some recommendations in that area. We also saw that infrastructure spending needed to make people's lives better. And in terms of service delivery, we focused very much on transport, which is the problem that is affecting the country and the ability of people to get to potential jobs. I think there were some issues having to do with the relations between the public and private sectors, and competition policy and the extent to which state enterprises were still dominant in the economy. That being said, I feel that in the recent months, the government has made some serious commitments to make changes in some of these areas. I think our policy advice is that these reforms cannot be piecemeal, they cannot be stop and go, they have to be comprehensive, they have to cut across a variety of these binding constraints to growth. In order to put South Africa back on a growth path, and I know that 3% real growth is a target, that many of these reforms need to be undertaken not in a half-hearted way, but in a very systematic and serious way. And with this World Bank report, I believe the government has been given a blueprint of the areas in which it might focus. And I wish the government well, and I congratulate the World Bank on having prepared a very policy-focused report that doesn't provide 300 pages of recommendations, but provides some key recommendations in these areas that I mentioned. And I wish the government well in implementing many of these reforms. Thank you very much.
Before you give him a round of applause, I just want to acknowledge Danny. He's obviously an expert, and he really played a crucial role in the report by allowing collaboration and bringing certain people on board to be interviewed in order for us to come up with a really comprehensive report. So please, a round of applause for Danny. Trudy, I'm going to jump back to you, and then we're going to go into the audience. I love the fact that we ended off the last conversation with Javier speaking about President Cyril Ramaphosa, because you also have a connect to that, but also that he finished off the pointer on the creation of jobs. Now, I think a lot of people know you, but I'm just going to give a little bit of context without reading your bio, that you served President Cyril Ramaphosa as his advisor for 5 years. And I'm sure one such area that really kept you up at night was how do we create jobs? I want you to just jump right into, I was going to say one or two, but because of time, just what's one of the challenges that you were faced with, and what is the biggest breakthrough that we can come up with amidst all the intricacies, for lack of a better word?
Thank you for that, Thami. I think you're absolutely right. Job creation is really at the center of the challenge in South Africa. And I think to Axel's point earlier, you also need to have a number in mind in terms of what you're working towards. And certainly when I was at the presidency, the starting point was that we have 11 million people who are not in jobs, who are unemployed. And so whatever we do, we need to find a solution for the 11 million people. Now, we're not going to find jobs for 11 million people tomorrow or even in the next year. So we've got to have a vision of how we start, but bearing in mind that we are wasting people's productive lives if we don't find a solution to this. So the first element was to think about jobs in the usual way that most people think about it, that are created in the economy through economic growth in the market. And so how do we unleash that? And that then began that structural reform program that the finance minister talked about in terms of really thinking about all the constraints in the economy that are holding back the private sector and how to unleash those. So that was going to be one source of growth, but understanding that that will take time. And so the second layer of the challenge is to think about how the public sector enables jobs through public funding. And so during COVID, there was a big public employment program, but trying to think about how you ensure that that is productive work. You're not getting people just to dig holes. You're putting people in schools to support teachers. You're having community health workers, etc. But of course, in a fiscally constrained environment, you've got to always think about an exit strategy for those people, which takes us back to that growth imperative that eventually they have to find meaningful work. Then a third element that is often underplayed is also enabling people to create livelihoods for themselves, particularly small and medium enterprises and also informal enterprises. Haroon made the point that what stands out about the South African economy versus other middle income or developing economies is that we've got a very, very small informal or small business sector. Other countries would have a third of their jobs coming from that sector. We only have 10%. So also thinking about what's stifling the entrepreneurship in the economy from emerging. And so that started us thinking around how we revamp small business development, how we link the social grant agenda to actually enabling people to transition into meaningful livelihood opportunities. This is an ongoing agenda, and I think this report really helps in concretizing some of the ways to get those three elements in terms of what do you get the private sector to do, what do you get government to enable, and also how do you support small and medium enterprises. Finally, on the competition point, I think this report is absolutely on point. I also used to be Deputy Competition Commissioner many years ago, and I think really we've struggled with the idea of how do we create a dynamic economy where there are new entrants coming into the economy, where we're not stagnating. It's important to have big, companies that are national champions, etc. This is not to undermine that. At the same time, it actually makes those companies better if they're functioning in an economy that is competitive and enables entry from new ideas, new industries that really keep us at the frontier, because we're not going to have much innovation and change if we don't have that dynamism. So I think the emphasis on competitive markets is very important.
Just an indication of hands. Do we have any questions so far so that we don't rush the panel discussion? Wanting to take questions if there's no questions on the floor. Okay, great. I'll come back after I've asked James. Just if you do have questions, just slightly raise your hands and then we'll go into that as well. One aspect that was raised, James, and I'm going to come to you during the State of the Nation address, was the wanting to raise 100 billion rands for infrastructure investment. I think the direct question really is that even possible in the current conditions? And if your answer is no, what shifts need to be made in order to make us not just attractive locally, but internationally too?
Thanks, Thami. And maybe if I could just switch a little bit into the energy mode, because part of the infrastructure fits into energy, and actually the energy investments we need to make are significantly bigger than that. I think we all understand that energy is fundamental to every modern economy and no different to ours. And so the government's messaging around growth equals jobs and investment, I think these are really important. And then the focus from the World Bank on implementation is really key. So Thami, you encouraged us earlier to go out on a limb here, so I'm going to do that today. And I see that the chair of Eskom can back me up, Mteto. But I think that we are out of structural load shedding. We should take that and we now have to move on. This doesn't mean to say we've solved energy security in the long term, but at this stage we've really got to start focusing on implementation. So the key questions from an energy perspective is we've got to be now pivoting into affordability, reliability, sustainability. That's where we've got to sophisticate and start to mature. Now, the good news, and we talk about all these reforms, is actually from the government has made very clear statements. We've got the Electricity Regulation Amendment Bill, the Climate Bill. We've got the Transmission Development Plan, the market codes, the national transmission companies licensed and regulated. We have the Energy Action Plan under the President. We have the National Energy Committee focusing on doing work. So when we say, a lot has been done. We've moved incredibly quickly, but we come back to the investment decision. And certainly as the Energy Council, we've said we believe we need to spend about 2 trillion rand in direct energy capital over the next 10 years. That's about 1.3 trillion in generation. So wind, solar, gas, batteries, etc. We need to spend about 400 in transmission expansion and about 300 in distribution, recovery, and strengthening and expansion. That's without financing the softer skills, the issues, and one thinks of jet and a lot of other aspects. So you can add another 40% to that. So when we talk about 100 billion in infrastructure, the actual energy investment requirement dwarfs that. And that is really going to come back to the point that, we would be naive, I think, as an economy to think we can deliver that in a business as usual kind of model. So I think, Jacques, you actually said it, the changing role of business, of government, and also, importantly, partnerships and the link into international. We're going to have to work incredibly hard, but we're coming off a base where the government of national unity, the collaboration, the business-government partnership, are actually setting a platform that we really do believe that we've got the best opportunity ever. But the size and the scale and pace that we need to move at is incredibly difficult. So maybe as my kind of conclusion elevator pitch for Javier is that we need institutions, we need time, we need skills, we need finance. To get the institution and skills, we also need time and finance. But we can't do a business as usual model, and implementation really is the focus. So, partnerships and collaboration are key. The efficiency and effectiveness of spend, we don't have time to waste. And then it's about leadership and performance culture, which also goes back to a capable state. And as just a last example, if we look at our wonderful ministry that now has been formed officially from 1 April, we have an energy and electricity ministry. But they're targeting initially a setup of 12 people. If you go to the Energy Security and Net Zero Ministry in the UK, they've got 4,300 people. If you take our regulator in electricity and gas, they've got 159 people. Ofgem in the UK, they've got 1,300 people. Okay, so our institutions and maturity is just not there. And this is not an accusation against government. But the reality is if we don't have time and finance, we're going to have to partner, we have to collaborate, and we've got to be very, very focused on implementation. And then we've got to kind of move as quickly as we can. So it's wonderful, I think, to have the sort of support of the World Bank. It's been very disappointing to see some of the US shift and the Power Africa slowdown. We need those support functions, platforms, etc. So, we've got to make sure that we build collaboration and platforms in all forms.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Yeah. I like that. It's a progress over perfection. And in our respective spaces, we're all contributing towards that progress. And hopefully, eventually, we'll reach perfection. I like your use of word, it cannot be business as usual, because it taps into young people, of our country. Business as usual can't be business as usual. They don't even know what usual is. They knew, in the market. And I mean, I'm going to come to you because you're an entrepreneur. You're not just an entrepreneur. You also work with young people who are starting up their businesses, and you assist them. But obviously, there's challenges that they face in order to penetrate the market and to get certain innovations going that could help the solutions, maybe even in the report. Maybe you can speak to us a little bit of, what are these challenges? If you give me the biggest challenge that they actually face, and how can we overcome that to include them in these solutions?
Thank you, Thami. I've probably engaged with over hundreds of entrepreneurs, and we are not short of talent in this country. Entrepreneurs, these young people are innovative, they're determined, and they're willing to sacrifice. Many of them are willing to forego their big salaries at management consulting companies, which they qualified to work at, to solve some of the toughest challenges that South Africa has. And so, just to start there, so it's not a lack of will, skill, or attitude from our young people to go into entrepreneurship, and most of them are tackling some of the biggest problems that the country and the continent is facing. So just this week, the IDC had released some of their results showing that it costs about R1 million for one job, to create one job. Now, that is that's not outside benchmarks globally, but we can see this be significantly reduced to between 50 and 200,000 Rand per job created if we invest in SMEs. So what is the biggest challenge entrepreneurs are facing? It's access to finance. And one of the lovely young ladies on the video said it's access. The finance is there, but it's not accessible. I saw in the report, and Javier and Jacques did a wonderful job in the report. I think it's not that we need to drive significant more investment to VCs and angel investors. We need to be thinking about innovative funding solutions that really speak to what entrepreneurs need. The reality is that VCs, the mandate that they have is very much biased towards tech businesses that can 10x within the next 5 to 7 years. How long does it take a business to achieve product market fit in South Africa? 7 to 9 years. So already we have misalignment of incentives from the VCs and the businesses. What we need are blended finance solutions that help de-risk businesses access traditional funding from banks as well as from VCs. A good example of this, I've been working with Anglo-American Impact Finance Network, which provides technical assistance to entrepreneurs who are pre-investment ready, to make them investment ready to access funding from banks and VCs or investors across Africa, well, South Africa, Africa, and globally. Now, a great example of how we've used catalytic capital to enable significantly more funding going to businesses that would ordinarily be excluded is just on our doorstep here at Woodstock. There's a company called 𝗃𝗃𝗃 Labs, and they are they provide they do plant-based manufacturing of products like oat milk and chocolate and ice cream, but they had a small facility here which was only supplying local restaurants and local stores, Spars and Woolies, or not Woolies, but Spars and other kinds of retailers. Now, that catalytic capital that we're providing them, which is only 2 million Rand, is helping expand probably their existing facilities in Epping. Now they've got new facilities in Epping that is going to be 5 times the size of their facilities here, has enabled them to access additional manufacturing equipment, and that is going to allow them to export to Mauritius and the European markets. Awesome. So that's how catalytic capital can be critical in inviting, one, growth to the existing businesses that are out there in the market that may not be a great mandate fit for a bank. Another way to use catalytic capital is in underserved regions like Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and the Northern Cape, where mining and agriculture sectors are dominant. So in that regard, why not take concessional debt or conditional grant funding provided to businesses that have proven models that are operating outside of that specific market and incentivize them to pilot their model in these new regions. A good example of this is we brought Good Nature Agro, which is a Zambian company, into Limpopo. So what they do is they work with small-scale farmers across Africa and help them get high-quality, high-value legumes to premium markets. So instead of having only one set of season for agriculture or small-scale farmers, off-season, they're not earning an income. So trial soybeans, the production of soybeans in the region, and enable them to earn throughout the year. So let's try and incentivize these companies to come into underserved regions and pilot innovative business models that can enable small to medium enterprises, even micro enterprises, to really thrive.
Thank you for that. Thanks, Amina. Do we have any questions in the audience? I'm going to do one round. Going once. Going twice. Closed. I think I appreciate the fact that the three speakers here on stage are going to be networking with us for those that are going to be joining us for the networking session. So I'm going to allow that to happen. And I mean, for those of you who are joining us online, feel free. Trust me, there's a new term that's called Googleable. All three of them are Googleable, so you can reach them on their respective pages and engage with them there on the online world that they live in. And I know, I mean, I've had the opportunity of hanging out with them now online as well, and I think they would be more than willing to answer all your questions, not even just related to this, just relating to driving the inclusive growth of South Africa. Mention the report when you have conversations with them and you want to give, you know, other people feedback from them too. But it will allow you to all network with them during the networking session. So please, a round of applause for me. We've got James, Amina, and Trudy as they make their way to their seats. So to round us off, I told you we'd catch up time. Told you. So to round us off, I'm now going to invite to stage and none other than the World Bank Country Director for South Africa, someone who I hold near and dear to my heart. I'm so excited that I get to see her again. Please, a round of applause for Satu Kahkonen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And it seems that now I'm standing between the networking and the finishing of the event. So I want to start, first of all, by thanking all of you for joining this event today. I'm specifically grateful to our speakers. Honorable ministers, unfortunately, already had to run because we are a little bit over time. They have other commitments, but very much, appreciated the discussion. Our goal, indeed, with this report is to generate dialogue and generate discussion about how to accelerate growth in South Africa. We are very happy that many of the recommendations of the report are actually already being implemented. And that shouldn't be a surprise, given that we did this report together with the government. But there are still some things there that could be done if they are deemed to be the right measures to take. And obviously, I hope that this is going to trigger, further discussion. What more could be done? Or what are there other alternatives than what we are putting forward? But let me I'm going to be brief and, just thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for participating in this dialogue. And we look forward to continuing this discussion with you going forward. So this is not the end, but this is the beginning of discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think this is where I take the opportunity to say goodbye to our online guests, because I don't know where your refreshments are and where you're joining us from. So thank you so much for joining us online. Until the next one, goodbye to our online guests. We'll just give them a chance to break. Just a few announcements for everybody that is here physically. So we are having a network and a refreshment session there at the back. Your parking tickets, you do have validated parking tickets. So please do go. Can I